Daniel's here. Correctivity for homeostasis, and thereby autonomy and sovereignty for European peoples, genus and species. Okay. I wasn't going to do a show tonight, but realized that I ought to for the usual sake of correctivity. Apologies to Carlyle in clarification of pragmatism's contribution. In my last show, I correctly criticized and denounced Curtis Yarvin and his neo-reaction, dark Enlightenment op as largely misdirection of STEM types. That was well-placed criticism. However, I very incorrectly cited Thomas Carlyle in particular as an example of the type of, quote, traditionalist bullshit that he would try to drag people into. Like most people, I dare say, I have some unacceptable gaps in erudition, if not familiarity, with thinkers from history. I would only take recourse in Paul Tillich's advice to accept the fact that you are accepted despite the fact that you are unacceptable. However, in defense of myself on that score, that is not being more familiar with Carlyle, and thereby sweeping aside on the basis of Curtis Yarvin endorsing him. I dare say there's not one person out there who doesn't have gaps in their bookshelf that are outrageous, that you wouldn't say to them, you haven't read so-and-so? You're not familiar with that guy? I can't believe it. That's really an important oversight. So, I mean, and then really, there's not even, you'll be able to say that even to scholars. So I'm not going to grovel in shame because I should have been a bit more, at least a cursory understanding of Carlyle before sweeping him aside like that. Nevertheless, my reason for skepticism regarding Carlyle will go to Yarvin's embrace and the undoubted use of his ideas for his people's interests, while not sufficiently filtering out where Carlyle is not good for European peoples. At first blush, I would note Carlyle's elitism and exceptionalism that would appeal not only to his kosher folk at this point in history, but as it appealed to the Nazis indeed, who, of course, did have some mirroring similarities. There were some mirroring similarities in their view, in their supremacist views, and even to an extent in purpose between the kosher folks and the Nazis. I mean, look even at Carlyle's stance that kosher folk should not be introduced into the British Parliament, but should rather go to Palestine. Well, Zionists would agree with that and would also be indignant about what they might view as the traitors of their diaspora integrating into Goyim marriage and institutions. And thus, while it's a bit cynical, there would be probably be among some hardcore kosher interests how should I say this? Not particular caring for the destruction of those kosher folks in diaspora who get further away from the core and integrate more and more into the Goyim. But again, my taking a critical distance from anything that Curtis Yarvin would endorse is well placed, because you have to look at, well, how it is that Carlyle's elitism is anti-democratic stance could be taken to an extreme, and the exceptionalism could serve Yarvin's folk, that he would get ahead of that reaction. Those who might look into that and commandeer it as best he could. In service of his people. As neo-reaction and dark enlightenment clearly is controlled opposition. That's not to say, once again, it's not to say that I shouldn't have even a cursory familiarity with Carlyle. Yeah, he had some things right for sure, but then he became disillusioned with Christianity, for example. That's not, but then again, I'm not going to grovel too much, because you don't have to come to various positions, solid positions, through the auspices of Carlyle's literature. So you might, and he might enhance your understanding indeed. Again, I love the Paul Tillich quote. However, just to goes to show that you can make use from even a Christian like Paul like Paul Tillich can have some very good advice. Well, more than a few bits in Tillich's case, but accept the fact that you must accept the fact that you are accepted, despite the fact that you are unacceptable. It's radically existentialist when you think about it, in a good way. My next correction is more of a clarification. I should have been more clear regarding Hilary Putnam's observation regarding the contribution of pragmatism. Now, I'm sorry, Hilary Putnam is half kosher, but that doesn't mean that a half kosher person can't say things that are true and good. As in this case, he once wrote, "The great contribution of the pragmatists is to show that fallibilism and anti-skepticism are compatible. Fallibilism is not to be confused with epistemological skepticism." Okay, so I'll try to put that into context of willing suspension of disbelief and the hermeneutic turn, which I was discussing last time. As it could have been that part, how pragmatism joins with hermeneutics was a bit murky, as it was actually perhaps the first time I was even paying any attention to that connection, and there clearly is one. I wasn't helped by a bit of dyslexia kicking in, so to speak, as I began to apply the concept of willing suspension of disbelief. And in regard to mere facticity, I said that a willing suspension of disbelief in facts. Well, there could be that too, but facts on that would be to confuse the concept by not clarifying on what level of facts. Willing suspension of disbelief of momentary and episodic facts could be helpful and necessary, even in order to maintain attention, coherence, and faith in broader and what might well be more important patterns, cultural patterns, of course, or group patterns. So when Heidegger talks about the liberation from mere facticity, the arbitrary facticity of the thrownness, that is, the circumstances into which, the existential circumstances into which we're thrown by no choice. Yes, you can say it's a social situation of some sort, not necessarily as politically well organized as might serve to reconstruct our species in the long run. But it is there. The girding likely to be reinforcing to some extent, as it would correspond with a natural biological speciation defense. Nevertheless, it is a thrownness and an arbitrariness which is not going to necessarily be maintained by sheer emergentism, though it's a reasonable hypothesis to suggest that our emergent qualities will tend to be conservative of the selfish gene and be inclined to reproduce our kind. GW, for example, is virtually hanging his entire enterprise on that, and clearing away not only hermeneutic concern, but trying to clear away not only the hermeneutic concern, but the diagnosis of hermeneutic misdirection, which is only in the end made me recognize that this man is absurd and he doesn't know what he's talking about. Yes, the emergent is important to pay attention to at one end of the hermeneutic circularity, and it generally provides solid guidance, but it's certainly not enough, and in part for our more Augustinian nature and the attendant naivety. It's still going to be, it's not going to make us immune to hermeneutic misdirection by our enemies. And this is why what I'm saying is so important. This is why, for one, purporting to be Heideggerian, as GW does, it's so important to really flesh out an up-to-date, even a Heideggerian perspective, because while Heidegger did incorporate and indeed was the purveyor into present-day philosopher of hermeneutics from philosophical forebears, notably Dilthey. He downplayed it. He was more emphasizing emergentism, and I think that he was concerned that the potential for over speculation and even veering off into Cartesian detachment once again is possible, where hermeneutics is not, where the hermeneutic circularity, or he called it a circle, Delphi called it a circle. I think circularity is a better understanding. It is not not practiced with sufficient rigor, not reined in with sufficient rigor to discipline its imaginative function. But it is a necessary imaginative function. So anyway, this would be an underemphasis. Maybe Dilthey probably was too speculative and too detached from the facts with hermeneutics. I would have to brush up on that too, but that's as I recall. At any rate, Heidegger thought so, and he didn't want to make that mistake. And so while he was a hermeneut, he was more focused on the emergent, holding fast to our ways. And this would actually be something that, in a sense, needs to be corrected in Heidegger. That is, it would need to emphasize a little more. Deploy more the concept of hermeneutics, just as we have to be less individualistic than Heidegger was. That might have been okay for Heidegger to find the path to protect our peoples through the individual's unanimity with his emergent being. He could take that for granted more in the German situation of his time, as there was just a long history of enough loyalty of the group. We can't take that for granted now. So again, anybody who thinks that I am against individualism is not understanding me. It's just that this is not the priority now. We're not going to have our individualism unless our group bounds are reestablished, and that requires a breadth of conceptualization. That is, we must suspend disbelief in John Locke's empirical concept, as he disbelieved in the concept of social groups as an empirical reality. We have to suspend disbelief and recognize, warrantably assert classificatory boundaries of our biological patterns. That we're not just discrete individuals, but in fact connected in a biological system to some extent. And much to the chagrin. Let me come back to my page. Thanks, Torment. Though it is much to the chagrin though it is much to the chagrin of, say, a semiagog or guest worker or others who are in reaction to the kosher rhetoric within praxis, who want to try to foundationalize an unassailable boundary to our people. The boundary is, in some senses, contestable. We can interbreed with others. It's not. I agree. It's not a good contest. It's not. It's very disingenuous. But you can't have. There's not a pure warrant. Nevertheless, there is warranted assertability and operational verifiability. That is to say, of our group patterns. But this idea, this hermeneutic idea, and the liberation from mere facticity, again, is crucial given our thrownness into existential circumstance, which are a tiny bit arbitrary anyway. That is to say, well, look around. Our people don't have to be loyal to us, and our boundaries are not just going to be maintained by sheer dint of our emergentism. And our boys are not going to be serving their own interests and their people's interests well, necessarily, if beholden to the mere arbitrary toss of late modernity. As I was saying, let's say you were just for the clear example, let's say you're a nerdy type guy. You're an engineer, a scientist, and not the most impressive, imposing at first blush to young ladies. Who, in puerile, unsocialized correction, might well be cheerleaders thrilled by the end zone dance, the episode of the end zone dance, or the moment of kicking sand in the face of the scrawny nerd white guy. Well, these are facts. It can be a fact that this black guy can be an exceptional wide receiver bursting into the end zone with his fast twitching muscle fibers. Cooper Kupp, notwithstanding. He might be more prolific in the moment in other ways, of course. Might be. This could be a fact to some extent, but, and that's why, that's where the concept of liberation from mere facticity becomes operative. These episodic and momentary abilities are transcended through autobiographical and other narrative. Placing the sort of nerd above it, as he might in his willing suspension of disbelief, in his value to the broader, more important pattern of a better society for his, say, scientific and engineering skills, for his part, not only in that creation, but in the creation of the kind of people, include and in particular this kind of woman. No, you're connecting to a relational level. You're moving beyond moment and episode. Hermeneutics is helping you to liberate you from the facticity of that, wherein some alien biology is the victor, and you become reconnected with the fact that you're on your relational level, that you are coevolutionary with these women, that these interlopers of our broken borders and boundaries, that they would try to lay claim on for the mere facticity of their end zone dance, or the horrendous arrogance of a Snoop Dogg who would ask white women if they'd ever blank to black blank. He said that to Amber Heard, and she said yes, by the way. So, all the more reason for rooting against Amber Heard. Scumbag. But this concept, you see how this concept is important in so many ways. Of hermeneutics, liberation from mere facticity, and how it corresponds with what Heidegger called authenticity, but what is probably more clearly understood, although not not necessarily exactly the same thing as coherence. Coherence of applied to the individual, to our corporeal self. This is coherent autobiography. And of course, this would be a narrative that's necessary to apply to our group emergence as well. So the two non-Cartesian concepts of emergence and hermeneutics are functioning together, are getting a handle on hermeneutics is essential to reconstruct our species for our homeostasis, our self-governance, our autonomy, our sovereignty. Because it won't necessarily do it of ourselves. Semigod can try to get back to the innocence of mood signs. It's like, let's get away from all that language. That's the domain of the kosher folk. We have to get away from language and just, piss on trees to mark our territories. And that's how desperate. There couldn't be a more clear sign of reactionary thinking and the doltishness of the right wing. We have to, and if we don't get a handle on our hermeneutics, this circulating process of managing imaginative breadth in order to understand our group system and set down conceptual boundaries, even though they might not seem empirical to John Locke. They are, but that's another matter. It's not altogether apparent necessarily. They are empirical, that's to say. If we don't get a handle on hermeneutics and just let that be the realm of the kosher folk, of course they're going to deploy it against us, and they do and have. This is part of the red cape. Everybody saying, "Oh, the left, they're all about narrative and they don't deal with facts and nature and truth and reality." Universal, ultimate principles that like we do as like they do. I'm not even as right wingers. Well, hermeneutics properly understood, and again, it's like it's actually good to make an example of them because it's so clear and so central and so important. When Kevin MacDonald doesn't understand hermeneutics as our thing, as a European thing, and says that it's only, the instrument of the kosher folks in anti-science, he's badly misunderstanding its hermeneutic function, or it's anti-Cartesian function. Yes, it will correct for bad science, like when Spencer Wells of National Geographic says we're all Africans down under the skin, and that's that. It's like, so therefore these are not important differences. Well, a proper hermeneuticist with historic breadth, of course, will correct that and not allow for this stupid scientism. So it's not anti-science, it's anti-bad science or bad application of science. As in that case, in that important case, we're all Africans under the skin. Come on. Yeah, we evolved from there, and we, with any sense, don't want to go back. Uh, but hermeneutics is a circulating process, a process of engagement and inquiry rather than being stuck in Cartesian detachment. It brings us back in survey. And it's a survey, if it's conducted well and responsibly, that yes, will allow for liberation from mere facticity and coherence and imaginative breadth and scope of concept to structure not only your autobiography but the history of your people as it is to be maintained in homeostasis, but also will circulate back to empirical verification, in other words, scientific concerns, as need be, gracefully, not as GW stupidly tried to say, clunkily. It's eminently graceful, even if you have kind of like squared out some working hypothesis, some topoi. In order to provide frameworks of examination. As I said, I like to correct Maslow's hierarchy of motives. I like to set forth the social union first, and then add routine, sacrament, and self, along with self-actualization, in a circulating process of optimality, to be managed in optimality, in order to bring our group system, help bring our group system back into function and stability, and to try to put an end to this concept as it's applied through the modernist concept of Abraham Maslow's, where it's going to rupture social order and perpetually. But the point is that hermeneutics is not anti-science. It enhances science. As a geneticist over at Majority Rights once said correctly, that the best scientists are hermeneuticists. Hermeneutics enhances. It's necessary, in fact, to good science. It's just necessary altogether. As the liberation from mere facticity is necessary to coherence, the first task of any individual in the world. And with coherence, you have set down a track record, so to speak, that provides for accountability. You're not all over the place like an animal, running around with a chicken with your head cut off. And with accountability, you've set the grounds for agency. Because you're saying, okay, I set down this rule and this path. And then once you fulfill that, you begin to establish warrant and warranted assertability. And the same principle applies not only to individual but to group. But you can see how our enemies want us to get us lost in the weeds of facticity, reacting as right-wingers into sheer objectivism and the inherent instability that goes along with that narrow objectivism for its short shrift of social accountability, lacking the correctivity and therefore lacking the homeostasis, which is self-corrective system, which is going to be a stabilizing thing. And it's more characteristic with the depth grammar of the left, of unionization. That is, it's not Curtis Yarvin and Thomas Carlyle and Joseph Goebbels as exceptions. It's the group, generally speaking, having an understanding of its boundaries, and any member understanding that. It's not democracy, it's that particular thing is not up for vote, and everybody understands that, and they can see that if the quote, somebody proposes themselves as an exception to that boundary and it's going to open that boundary, then they are, in one way or another, stopped from doing that. Okay. But nevertheless, okay, Carlyle said some good things, but I'm sure that when I look at someone like Curtis Yarvin endorsing somebody, that there's going to be something very wrong. There's going to be many good things, though Carlyle might have said, or it did, it seems, and beautiful writing or whatever. There's going to be something very, very wrong there for our interest, or at very least in the way Curtis Yarvin's going to deploy it. So my reservation is that part. I'm not going to apologize for. I just apologize for sweeping him aside entirely. But he definitely had some good thoughts. Again, you don't have to come to these thoughts by way of Carlyle, but it'd be wrong to sweep him aside as a complete nothing. That would be absurd. But the Lincoln, if anybody wants to join me, otherwise we can keep this a short show so that I can save StreamYard time. Looks like we can, if nobody does join me, we can keep this to an hour show. But this show does contain some gems. The Tillich and the Putnam quote. Again, just to repeat Tillich's advice, to accept the fact that you are accepted despite the fact that you are unacceptable. Now that's a liberation from your facticity. And the other idea of Hillary Putnam. I thought it was a woman too, but he's a man, believe it or not, with the name Hillary. who once wrote, the great contribution of the pragmatists is to show that fallibilism and anti-skepticism are compatible. Because you see that they're taking the idea that you don't have to be perfect all at once. You can be imperfect, you can be fallible, get it partly right, but that doesn't mean you have to be altogether skeptical of the idea or the source. Rather, you apply correctivity. You don't have to be skeptical, as a guest worker would be, for example. Just sweeping aside everything on behalf of his gargantuan, unmerited ego. All right. But one of the ways in which the pragmatists went wrong, and Hillary Putnam didn't consider himself a pragmatist, and I guess I don't either. Although we are all pragmatists by default because we have to be. There's no avoiding that. But I can play the no true Scotsman game. Not altogether disingenuously with pragmatism, saying, in the sense that a certain amount of idealism and principles that are not to be trivialized as mere practicalities are practical to deploy in your philosophical worldview. Now, one of the ways in which the pragmatists went wrong with Dewey and William James's Pragmatism and the Meaning of the Truth is even better than Dewey, I think, though there's a lot to be gained from Dewey. There's too much practical force, literally, in Dewey. Not enough prefigurative historical forbearance, prefigurative and contextual force. But anyway, too practical in a sense was Dewey. But I don't think that William James was as guilty of that. But where they were both mistaken, and Dewey especially, was overextension of the concept of democracy, for sure. And this is what like a Curtis Yarvin and others and Hitler would be criticizing. Trying to extend the franchise indefinitely, and it goes totally absurd with these liberals to where they're introducing their new populations across the border in order to vote for the Liberal Party. And this is supposed to be good, but you see the concept is intelligible and good, albeit in too primitive a form of democratic input to correct, ongoingly correct various propositions. The concept needs to be refined, of course. In the first place, like I said, or the borders and the boundaries basically are not up for vote. You're free to leave. You're not free to impose destruction on a group that doesn't want to be destroyed or shouldn't want to be, right? The second correction to this idea of democratic correctivity, and you'll notice prominent figures are rubbing their hands together and ready to sick this as a reaction on the Ukrainian side to the Russian attack. Was it Mearsheimer and Joel Kotkin and Timothy Snyder? They're going to propose this absurdly liberal overextension of the democratic idea to which would destroy our people, and they don't care. They overextend it such that it would not maintain homeostasis, which is how it should be deployed. Now, first of all, of course, like any normal person would say, that not just anybody should be enfranchised into the vote. That would be the first distinction. So not people from outside of the nation, obviously, or introduced into the nation just to vote for the Liberal Party, which would effectively destroy our boundaries. Obviously. Then you would probably add age restrictions. Nobody under the age of 30 or something like this could vote. The next thing you would do is that you would introduce a little test of sufficient, first of all, understanding that the boundaries and borders are not up for vote. Secondly, that they have some understanding of the civics of the nation, of the history of our people, and minimal understanding, at least. What a minimal requirement would be set in order to be able to vote. The next requirement would be and then there'll be further delimitations for a more weighted vote as adjudicated. And then you would look at the concept of voting itself as a clunky, clumsy, quantitative thing. This number of votes wins against that number of votes, which doesn't really get into an honest sorting out and integrating of the ideas, the specificatory structures at hand, which are to be really negotiated and sorted out properly among honest interlocutors, as opposed to people who are debating and voting on one side or the other. So that's how Correctivity would vote. It would be the shaping and the crafting of specificatory structures. It wouldn't be like voting in a democratic sense. But although there would be inputs from various positions to correct and maintain the homeostasis. What's this parallel society? Hello?
Hi, Daniel.
Oh, hi, Claire.
How are you?
Well, fine. What do you want with me, Claire? You're barking up the wrong tree.
I just wanted a conversation.
Well, you're going to turn it. Well, what's wrong with that is you always try to turn it towards secular Coranism, and then you try to trap me into various things which could stigmatize my platform. Not something that I need. You are advocating a religion that I reject, and most people, almost everybody else rejects. That's why.
You don't have to talk about these things. I actually wanted to ask you a question about your avatar. I can't quite make out what it is. It's a
It is.
boat
It
or
is.
something.
It is funny. An artist. It's avant-garde-ish. It's.
What?
It looks like a pig's head or pig's nose or something. You know.
It-
You know what it is? It's the top of the ruin of columns of a column temple in the Roman Colosseum. It had this kind of like funny shape. If
yeah, yeah.
anytime you see pictures of the Roman Colosseum, that's usually one of the images.
Yeah, I remember that there was a modern sculpture in Hyde Park. No, it was Kensington Gardens, and it was it looked like a mutton bone, and actually that remained. It was a Henry Moore. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Yeah, it's kind of absurdist.
No, just sort of modern, and he just had these sort of big sculptures that
Yeah,
with some abstract shape, and it was a Henry Moore, but they moved it, which is a bit sad, but it used to be there.
yeah. It is a funny, awkward shape, and I don't. It doesn't necessarily correspond with pragmatism either. This is classic, but well, whatever.
Yeah,
I just kind of liked it because it's funny and it's classic, or it's a unmistakable image as well. Yeah, associated with the Roman Colosseum.
right, right. I mean, it reminded me of Henry Moore, but I guess I was a little puzzled about your title. So I did. I'm afraid I fell asleep when you were talking about whatever you were talking about. But anyway, then I
Oh, you
wake
can
up.
listen to it again. I was talking about Carlyle because when I was talking about Carlyle for one thing, and also clarifying of the great contribution of the American pragmatists. But first of all, to sum up, with regard to Carlyle, I began in talking with Mirth Baron yesterday. I was discussing how Curtis Yarvin and the Dark Enlightenment and neo-reactionary is a controlled opposition meant, of course, to misdirect European peoples from a proper understanding of how postmodernity is supposed to function. So he's kind of trying to redirect this, the neo-traditional reaction. And one of his favorites apparently is Thomas Carlyle. Now, I was shown to be ignorant of Carlyle when I said to Mirth Baron that, oh well, Curtis Yarvin will try to direct STEM reactionaries into some bullshit like Thomas Carlyle or something like that. And while it's correct to say that Curtis Yarvin will take will take Carlyle and deploy him for his elitist kosher interests. Don't yawn.
I'm sorry.
That was a completely voluntary yawn. That was not involuntary.
No, really,
And it
I
was.
didn't think you could hear
Don't
me.
you insult me? Anyway, so Yarvin would I'm correct to be skeptical of anything that he would latch onto as susceptible to his egregious misdirection, and you can see in Carlyle some elitism and uh, prone to overcompensatingly over democraticness, which was, by the way, enjoyed by uh, Hitler's regime. Uh, so this would not be in the interest of European peoples necessarily. Of course, it isn't necessarily. Although um, I wanted to say that I was in remiss for not having even a cursory understanding of Carlyle because he has many good ideas. Not that you have to come by way of these ideas by Carlyle, but he talks about antique farm equipment and so on. He's pretty good, and so I was wrong to
He was a Victorian, wasn't he?
I guess but he was more worthwhile. I was overly dismissive of him, but I wanted to add that you won't find anybody, no matter how great a scholar, with gaps in their bookshelf, but you won't be able to say you haven't read this person, you haven't read that person, you don't know who this is. How could you? That's absurd. Anybody they talk to, there's going to be some books that they really should have read and should understand, but won't. I've never, the professors that I've talked to will be guilty of this. So there's no scholar even. So I wanted to forgive myself, and that gave me the opportunity to read a great quote from Paul Tillich, the Yale theologian, who was a Christian, but despite that had many good things to say, one of which being one must accept, how does it go? 1 second. Where the hell is it? 1 second. Oh, yeah. Accept the fact that you are accepted despite the fact that you are unacceptable. That's always been one of the great quotes from Paul Tillich. Now, that's a beauty. And then I went on to clarify, because I had been discussing, it was unpracticed because I'd never really tried to render the connection properly between pragmatism, that is the American pragmatists, William James and John Dewey, and hermeneutics. So I didn't, but in doing that, I invoked the concept of pragmatism's great contribution, which relied upon an observation from Hilary Putnam, who was half your friend people, by the way. Nevertheless, he said something good. He said the great contribution of the pragmatists is to show that fallibilism and anti-skepticism are compatible. And that
what is fallibilism?
Well, the fact that we in our ideas can be fallible, less than perfect in our understanding. But the great contribution of the pragmatists is they're not going to say, okay, well, that idea isn't 1,000% perfect, so we have to be skeptical not only of the source of the idea, but the entirety of the idea. Sweep it aside, and the pragmatists say you don't have to do that. You can correct, shape, and craft the idea. Take it as a specificatory structure, which is basically good, largely good, but just needs to be fixed up a little. And this is the pragmatist's idea, right? It's practical. You're beginning with a practical idea, and then they parlay that into something that could be deployed in defense of democracy. Where they went wrong, of course, was to go way overboard with the promotion of democracy. Now, democracy, as promoted by John Dewey, is right to be criticized, and E. Michael Jones notes that John Dewey was instrumental in teaming up with your kosher friends, for example, to engage in a program in the name of democracy of breaking up the Catholic communities in the inner cities and introducing, for example, you asked me last time where the blacks in Newark came from. Well, they were brought from the South to blockbust and rupture the Catholic enclaves there, which would be, Italian, Polish, Irish, and then scatter them into the suburbs, which was also good for the car industry and such.
Oh, they wanted to keep labour from the south. Is that what you're saying?
No, they don't want labor from the south. They wanted to break up the resistance to Anglo and Jewish hegemony, which relied upon a scattered individualistic culture. The Catholics were being too ethnocentric and too groupish, you see. So, and this would fly in the face of Dewey's pragmatist concept of democracy, where we were all American individuals, not members of groups. See, and of course the kosher folks would take their own group interests for granted, don't want other groups to be powerful, and the Catholics would be seen as a great competitor to the kosher folks. So they would of course find a useful idiot in a sense in John Dewey. Anyway, so as E. Michael Jones said, and this much is true, they were breaking up, they were killing the cities. They killed my city, Newark, and brought up all these blacks who rioted and burned it down, and in 1967 and 1968, when Martin Luther King was killed in 1967, when there was an incident of police violence, some Italian policemen stopped a black motorist and roughed him up a bit. So the blacks rioted, burned down the city, and killed like 38 people or something, and LBJ had to, when President Johnson had to call in the National Guard and so on. It was a mess. They're bringing in tanks and so on into the sports stadium, which was right by my grandmother's house on 11th Street there. So this is kind of the traumatic situation that I was brought up in. And one thing to note, that these riots, these black riots, are not new. And then there you had on television Malcolm X saying that the black man is going to rule, and I'm thinking as a child, no thanks. Anyway, so that was Newark, but our family moved to close by Montclair. Nevertheless, my grandmother's remained there in an Italian enclave in the North Ward of Newark. Precariously next to all these what became predominantly black areas, nightmarishly so, of Newark and East Orange. Again, when people try to call me ignorant, I just look at them, and people who don't know, haven't been immersed in the circumstances, say, no, you're the ignorant ones. And it's not a situation to compare, as well, you sort of did, to the waves of Asian immigration coming through. I don't know how that plays out. It's another matter. It's another issue entirely than the blacks who had been there since the beginning of America. They brought us slaves who are a different kind of black, from Western Africa than, say, Snorkelblog tried to draw the comparison between the Sand Bushmen and the Gods Must Be Crazy movie. I don't know if you ever saw that. And the Sand Bushmen, who are the oldest people on Earth, densest accumulation of mitochondrial DNA, and American blacks, and there's no comparison. It's a world of difference. The Sand Bushmen are these gentle, nomadic people living in Africa, and nothing whatsoever like American blacks, and probably and blacks from other parts of Africa. So anyway, it's an annoyance when people don't understand and act like you're the bad person, because you don't want to be subject to this imposition of the kind of which E. Michael Jones.
You don't want people rioting in your neighborhood. Were you around?
Not just rioting. I don't want their behavior at all. I don't want to be some. It could even be alternative hypothesis made this acute observation. Just the obnoxiousness of the day-to-day behavior that's so alien, that rap music is so, it's such an alien. Don't you find it alienating and disturbing to hear this kind of like strange warlike music that that barely sounds human? I mean,
a
that's
lot
not.
of white people listen to it and know the
Well, I don't.
words
Yeah,
and rap along to it.
there's a part of marketing to that too, because they're promoting the alpha male, and blacks in a sense are very alpha-ish, but that's not to say. Of course, I know that there's lots and lots of great black music, but not that. Now, I'm sure you don't like rap music, do you?
No, I
Well,
don't.
then-
But I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's not that easy to do it because it's I tried once at karaoke. It's not that easy.
Oh no, it's not. It's not easy to do. Definitely, it
Because
takes serious
I
dribble.
can't talk that fast, clearly.
Eminem is an exception, but there's some. Alex Linder was playing one Eminem song, which the guy raps with such amazing speed. He has to take second place to no black rapper, but it's something I can't do it.
No, you know Angela G. She can do it quite well.
Is she white?
Yeah, she's white. She's a hippie. Remember her?
Oh, that Angela. I didn't know she. How do you know she? Oh, she raps with you?
No. Well, I can't rap with her, but I went to her channel and she did this sort of stream when she, basically, played songs and sang along with them.
Oh,
And
she's
hung out
funny.
with her friends.
She's funny. I have to hear that. I liked it when she said that, blacks might be able to loot a corporate store up to $1,000 and not get arrested, but if I tried it, there would be helicopters and strobe lights above.
Oh, she said that, and she
She's funny.
understand. Yeah.
Let me see who this empowered is. It's probably a troll, but I have to check. Hello, empowered. They're trying to get me.
I'm
They're
enjoying
trying
the
to get.
music.
Well, it's going to be a copyright strike. I mean, I don't. Can they? I like that. I like that song very much.
But which song is this? I don't know. But
I'll be Down in the Hole by Alice in Chains. But the thing is that I hope that. I mean, I hope they wouldn't take down the stream for just those few seconds. Would they?
No. I think you have to do it for a bit longer.
Yeah, but that's
Maybe
if I left.
over a minute
If
or
they left that, they were probably trying to get me a copyright strike.
Oh, you have so many people who hate you. Sad, isn't it?
Well,
I mean,
they hate me for my goodness. Yeah, yeah. Anyway.
Well, you can have a kind of background in the settings, and then you can let the person come on, do their thing, and question them. But in case they want to porn bomb you, you still have this background, and nobody else can see it but you.
I didn't know that. I
Yeah.
don't know. I'm not. I'm really. Even though I firmly consider myself an Xer when it comes to tech and computer management. I'm definitely on the boomer.
You're boomer tech.
I'm boomer tech. Badly, but yeah. Even
But
though
if you put
philosophically, I'm an Xer for sure.
You're a boomer, aren't you?
No.
If you're born before 1964, you're technically a boomer, aren't you?
No, because I mean, that's how the rough practical classification would divide. Yes, but obviously, there's going to be inconsistencies in the boundary in reality. There's going to be people especially when you get towards the the border of that divide. You're going to have people who are, though technically boomers, are going to be really early Xers, and there's going to be people who are technically early Xers who are really late boomers. Like Tucker Carlson would be more like a boomer, even though he was born in 1969. Rams Paul was a few years younger than me, would still be a boomer. Jim Goad, who was born the same year as I am, it would be a boomer. I am an Xer for particular reason, that by dint of the logical force of my older siblings who were boomers very much so, and by experience of the funk that they and the boomers in general left me in, I was forced and immediately identified with the concept of Generation X when the concept was first floated in the early 80s, around 1980. This is a generation that was disillusioned. They were more educated but they were less had less of an avenue to the financial reward and good fortune of the boomers. So and they were suffering the social consequences of the boomers' selfishness. This was all me. I totally and always identified with the boomers, with the Xers, with one, but I did one thing that the Xers have not done, is that I have applied the correct thing that the Xers were supposed to be doing, which was to be engaging in social corrective to the individualistic selfishness of the boomers. I was talking about how this one woman yesterday, Justine Brown, grew up with hippies and was
I
totally
interviewed her. Did you know I interviewed her?
Justine Brown?
Yeah, I did.
No, I didn't know that. But she's really down on hippies, right? And because she grew up in a hippie,
because her mother was, right,
and her father, wound up being like the head of this commune, and of course indulging in free love and having all these affairs, and this was just a catastrophe. And she wanted to say this was what she was taking the position that this was part and parcel of hippiedom, and I wanted to make it clear that no, it was not. This was part and parcel of the human potential, the kosher human potential movement's imposition on the hippiedom, and she even explicitly admitted that this commune that she was a part of was largely under the auspices of Fritz Perls, who was a sort of New Age guru of the late 60s, who was very much, a proponent of really selfish individualism and even misogyny. It could be said in Perl's case. But the thing is, this was not that kind of promiscuity and unfaithfulness to marriage. Justine Brown was rightfully saying that they were flouting or bereft the necessary institution of marriage, but that lack was not part of the essential motive of the hippies, and nor was free love. Free love was Herbert Marcuse. It was Fritz Perls. It was, Maslowian self-actualization, these kosher things, imposed on an inarticulate population. By definition, the motive for being is a matter of organic synthesis. Now, what you once correctly said was that the hippies were not politically articulate. That was true, and that's a big part of the problem. And their fault can be laid blame with them, because I have never heard a hippie, except for this one guy, Lone Jack, a Vietnam vet, who commented on one of my comments, I've never heard a hippie whose opinion are respected. Quite the opposite. They're revolting. But that doesn't change the fact that their underlying motive, which is to assign some intrinsic value to white men, was not radically important. It is radically important and organic.
What do you mean about valuing white men?
Well, I mean, we could put it plainly. If you're a white man and you've survived, you're alive, you've survived to this point in evolution, it's a reasonable working hypothesis that you merit at least a modicum of respect as worthy and innocent until proven guilty for the fact that you are part of a great people and a great culture and a part of even creating our women, a part and all that goes along with our society. Enough valued enough not to be expendable in war or expendable period. Let alone
But
in a
all
war.
men
Hold on, stop. Let alone to be expendable in a war that represents no clear and a threat that represents no clear and imminent danger, as in the case of Vietnam, where they were expected to die, and 56,000 boys died for that. For what? For the domino theory or Michelin Corporation's tire rubber. This is not something to be swept under the rug, as the kosher folk will try to do, as Ed Dutton and Justine Brown will misunderstand, as misrepresented by kosher motives of civil rights, of free love, or
I don't understand
hedonism
what Vietnam
and
has
drugs.
to do. I mean, Vietnam
What do
is
you call? Come on, Claire. This is why talking to you is an absurdity. You can't understand why what Vietnam.
why
has
can't
to
I
do.
finish my question?
We're talking about hippies.
Yeah.
The hippie movement corresponded almost pretty much exactly with the Vietnam draft. They were they were put up almost being toward death. So this was, by contrast to that, indeed an organic motive. It said, look, we should not be considered so intrinsically valueless as to have to be sent to die in this war against a people in a situation that represents no clear and imminent danger to our people in our national boundaries.
But you
And then,
have.
but
I can't even finish my point.
56,000 were
I
killed,
know you keep saying
and
that.
how many Vietnamese killed? And by the same token, the feminists were complaining that they needed the top of the hierarchy and making no note, of self-actualization, making no note of the fact that here's these white men who were with these very low grumbles, clamoring to be for this pathetic respect for the basis of the hierarchy of motives. So, of course, it's relevant and it's obnoxious when trad women will just in total sweep aside the hippies as if they weren't an expression of a profound organic motive, or some hypnotized fool like David McGowan with his weird scenes inside the Laurel Canyon will try to say that it was a CIA op. I'm gonna if you interrupt me with some stupid objection, I'm gonna.
Well, I don't know what you're talking
No,
about.
no,
All
no.
right? I'm just
Yeah,
stopping you because I don't know what you're talking about. Why can't I stop you?
Because you're
Because I don't know what you're talking about. You talk about these names. I don't know who's.
everybody knows who David McGowan is, and anybody might. It's not going to disrupt the flow of my argument. These are important points. Claire doesn't care. I'm not interested in her opinion. I'm not interested in stupid fucking secular Coranism. Go back and to your stream and leave me alone. Don't try to disrupt my stream of thought. Justine Brown was trying to say, along with Ed Dutton, was trying to act like that. The hippies were strictly bad. Ed Dutton was telling his daughter, trained his daughter to say hippie, bad, evil, and they're acting like this is a good thing. The rejoinder is, of course, what are they supposed to do? 56,000 of them are supposed to die so that you could have tire rubber? No, fuck you. So anybody who doesn't, I can be quite touchy when people are going along with the kosher red caping of that issue. Not because that's what it is. When you try to associate with Fritz Perls or Herbert Marcuse's Free Love or Abraham Maslow's variation of selfish pursuit of actualization and peak experiences, along with and the dark side of these human potential movements, the reflexive effect, not paying attention to the eminently valid motive beneath of Dasein and Mitdasein. A profound motive and expression of it which was not articulated. So I'm not going to allow people to continue to obfuscate this. Oh, what are you talking about? No, nobody knows what you're talking about. Fuck bullshit, Claire. Take it somewhere else. And I was saying that free love, quote, is not consonant with the hippie movement of being and being amidst your people. Because that's an opening of boundaries and a disruption of your system. You're not going to have being as a male if guys are coming from everywhere and trying to get with what would be your appropriate co-evolutionary partner. And our evolution, furthermore, as Europeans, is more K-selector than R-selector, and free love and promiscuity is an R-selector strategy. So this is not natural and not native. This is an imposition. And Herbert Marcuse was clearly, explicitly trying to subvert by design, the European peoples. He even said, I'll make Stalin look like a wuss if you want to see how to subvert Western civilization. This is what he said. And he was the big kind of free love guru of the times. You can see him among the 68ers in Paris. Students all around him on the podium. Anyway, so I had to clarify that Justine Brown was not wrong, though, to say that marriage was, the institution of marriage was extremely important. But she was wrong to suggest that it is not even more connected necessarily with the hippie motive for being. You're not going to have being and the stability, being a Mr. People, maintained without the sacredness of that choice, of that institution for marriage and monogamy. The hippies can be faulted, should be faulted further for being inarticulate, but not for their underlying motive. There's a reason. There are reasons why they were inarticulate, because organic synthesis is by nature not a matter of parsing and analyzing and making logical political distinctions. Also, it's flying the face of tradition. It's stigmatic. Men are not supposed to be pursuing the bottom of the hierarchy, right? They're supposed to be pursuing the top. Men are supposed to be leading the political way and leading the political charge and articulate, not trying to let matters settle and be with their people in a harmonious way. Although, in an organic, optimal process, that will happen. So they were inarticulate. Granted some leniency to be that way, so long as the Vietnam War was raging. But the moment the draft was over, 1973, I think, was the last person drafted. It started to evaporate, and feminism went into overdrive in 1972, 73. It was ominous and a nightmare coming ever and ever close, until it reached a crescendo in the 90s. Still, I scratch my head when people talk about getting nostalgic about the 90s. This, you had the worst of political correctness without the internet to talk back and to try to do something about it. No, the 90s were not good. Okay. So I think that we corrected what needed to be corrected. These are very important ideas that we've put forth in this stream. I'll give it another minute in case anybody else wants to join. Not Claire, I'm sorry. We do this kind of lawyerly kind of chop thing, trying to pretend you don't know things, disrupting my stream of thought. It's not helpful. So semi-apologies to Carlyle, hat tip to Putnam, and I hope that makes things a bit more clear. Yeah. So I want to thank you for listening, and again, I hope to be talking this coming Sunday with Mirth Baron, Per Norden, and Nathan, aka Snorkel Blog. Torment Uns, if you want to join us, you can as well. I hope I wouldn't at all mind if Zedez wants to join. I told her if she'll come on the stream, I'll make a deal with her. I will go at least 1 week without posting a picture on my Twitter of a girl in her underwear. I shouldn't do that. I guess I shouldn't do that. I guess I should be responsible to general audiences. I know. I have some really nice Czech lady photographer, Eva D, whose work I put up in my streams. She can't appreciate that. She's a dignified lady. I don't know. It's hard. It's very hard to resist a tropism. The beauty of our women. I don't want to make women who are, not manifesting these ideals feel bad, because obviously there are other more important things than beauty. Okay. So, I want to thank you all, and bye for now.